5 is discuss the lesson, and this is where we're going to try to remember that we are using always, we, and the lesson in referring to everything that we did today, because it is all about what we created. So we do have some guiding questions. Do we want to start with the guiding questions, or do we just want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first question is, how did the lesson unfold, and were there any surprises and or difficulties?
I think, as far as from me, the teacher piece of it, I feel as though it went really well. Like, I feel like, as far as how it unfolded, I feel like it went just as I kind of predicted it would in many aspects. The really interesting part for me is I don't always, as in depth as we did today, really think about like, well, if not, then this. Like, if they can't do or don't show me this, then we need to go this way. And that was so helpful because it wasn't as much thinking on my feet. I was able to like, yep, okay, we planned for this, so this is what we're going to do about that. So that was really good.
I agree with you because when I was sitting there and they were both like, I don't know what fishing is, I don't know what ice fishing is, and I looked at Julie and Jackie and I'm like, yay, we planned for that, yay!
Right. Because, and I probably would have been the same thing in the moment, but I didn't have to even think about it. Like, okay, yep, you haven't been fishing, so we're going to talk about these pieces about it. It was, that was great.
I think also another spot where you were able to do that was when we talked about what would happen if they didn't finish the book, or if we needed to move them along, and so you had a plan to finish reading that.
Because I would have otherwise panicked, like,
he's
oh,
not,
shoot,
and
the
he's
clock.
not,
Yeah,
and watching the clock, absolutely.
And I think in that moment it also solidifies then that Eduardo, because he finished first, but then it makes sure that he understood what happened in those last couple pages, because he was pretty quick, and I wasn't with him every page, so I'm not sure that he did understand all of it, so it was just nice to reinforce. As far as surprises, I think they're actually flipped in my brain. I was thinking Eduardo was going to present more of a problem as far as some of the breaking of words even, or just overall reading capability, and I felt like Braden struggled more kind of overall with that. And I also think that engagement piece that you talked about, Eduardo was very engaged in that story. Braden wasn't engaged in that story whatsoever. Well, not whatsoever, but just more minimally. And I just feel like that kind of was surprising for me too a little bit.
Something I noticed that relates to that engagement piece in watching the boys, and what I noticed when I was watching Eduardo is that when he would turn the page, I don't know if you noticed this as well, but he would study the illustration in depth before he ever looked at any of the words. And you could see the expression as he started to make meaning just from the illustration. So, to me, I think that's a really strong quality, that he has a really strong strategy,
right?
For using meaning while reading. Because he would even giggle sometimes as he picked up what was going to happen, and then he would start reading. So I think that was a strength to note.
Yeah, exciting. And along those same lines, studying those pictures, but then making sure that he understands that those pictures don't always reflect what the words are telling you. And you had that conversation with Braden, and we had talked about that in our planning, so.
That still threw me a little bit for a loop though, because I wasn't really thinking that actually would potentially happen, like, well, that's not what the picture shows though. You're right, it's not. So, and I was really happy and a little surprised at the end to hear how much he was contributing to the conversation too, based on what we had seen with his benchmarks. His conversations with his teacher weren't super strong, at least on paper, but I felt like he was able to contribute and share and add to the conversation.
And maybe it was that additional prompting that we planned for.
Maybe. right away too with the
Well,
teacher.
I wonder if the way we planned the orientation supported him being successful,
Mhm.
because we front-loaded that background knowledge.
Mhm.
Do you know what I'm saying? So when he had that to anchor in on, the background knowledge, and then he does have that habit of studying the photos or the illustrations,
Mhm.
and then reads it, I mean, that to me seems like a really good reading strategy for him.
Mhm.
But also there is a caution to it, because the harder the books get, that, you know,
Right.
it's not as supportive, that picture.
Right.
Mhm.
It's also interesting to me though that even though he was that intent on it, he still finished reading before Brayden did. You know, I don't know. And there were some spots in here when Eduardo was reading that I noticed he was really skipping over that punctuation. So it's a little curious for me to see as we go along how that affects kind of his understanding too.
I think what did surprise me was that the level J and Jace, not Jace, sorry, Brayden. And Brayden, because his reading record is a K, so I was thinking, okay, he's going to do a pretty good job in
Mhm.
this J, and then clearly the making and breaking words is, I mean, the right place for him.
Mhm.
Like when I was taking notes, the appealing,
Mm-hmm.
and
For
you
sure.
picked
Yeah,
up
that
on
too.
it. You picked up on it, and I just wanted to like, SOS, there's appeals, do you see it? But yeah, because then eventually, I think you recognized that too, and I think that was a surprise for me, thinking that, okay, the J may be a little easier for
Right.
him, but then his struggles and the amount of appeals, that I think surprised me. I was
Mhm.
thinking it would be probably a little more controlled than that for him.
Well, and even Eduardo, when I was with him, and he was at those multisyllabic words, and I think it must be his paper that has this note on it. Yeah, he'll say the separate chunks correctly, but I think we need to get in the habit of him putting those together. So he's saying the parts correctly, but he's not putting that word together then. He did it a couple of times with me when he was reading this book.
I took note on that. He needs more work with that. I
Mhm.
mean, even that word work that we had planned for, it was hard
Yeah.
for him.
Mhm.
And not even necessarily making the ache, you know. But I just took note that he needed more of that, and you noticed it in his reading also.
Yep.
Yeah, I know that maybe surprised me too, now that you bring that up, because we planned, and the first word selected was take, right?
Yes.
He didn't struggle with making it.
Yes, he did.
He did. What were the?
He wrote TAEK.
Oh, I thought that was Eduardo.
Oh, sorry, that was Brayden.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Right,
Yeah.
so Brayden did a really nice job making the word take.
Yes.
Yes.
He did a nice job,
Yep.
you know, he could even articulate very well how to do that procedure, and then when he got to the reading, like putting it into context, that's where he struggled.
Yep.
So then I was thinking, okay, where in the word work, like next step thinking, where in the word work would we help him to transfer that? So I was thinking about, would we have him write it? Would we have him put it into a familiar read and practice it in a familiar text? Or like I didn't know, but I was thinking, just in isolation with the letters, that was pretty successful for him. But then it's the transfer, the application of it is what I was wondering about, so.
Well, and that's where I brought out, which I'm also glad we talked about, a possibility beforehand was bringing out that whiteboard and the marker. So he was struggling with whatever word that was a couple of different times over here. And I said it was warmest.
Yeah.
And that's where I brought this out and said, okay, here's the first part. And he could get that part. And then, so showing him how to break it that way too, maybe that's something he just needs a few more times, is to
Right.
have this out and ready to go so he can see that
Mhm.
within the story. And a big thing for him is, he'll say it, SILD or whatever was the first one he said, I think, something like that. And, you know, that's where he appealed again. Well, does that make sense to you? No. And then he sort of tried SLID, and then I said, well, does that make sense to you? And then he was able to kind of reread that and say, oh yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So maybe it's just even having that.
Yeah, and I wonder, I had taken note on that also, the SLID in the consonant cluster.
Mm-hmm.
If he knows it in this, you know, with just the families in a consonant, what if you added in consonant
Yeah.
clusters to see how he did with that with making words? And if that's where the breakdown comes in.
Just wondering too of layering in a writing piece to that. So they can, like showing them that reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how they would respond, especially when you're going into that writing piece, or when we go into that writing piece, the responding to reading. Can we somehow make a connection during the word work with the writing component? So, you know, they build it, break it, build it again, clear the whiteboard, now write the word,
Mm-hmm.
you know, write a new word, write the word shake.
Right.
You know, and then you talk about, well, now you can, you know this, you know how to do this in your, you know, when you're building words, you can read it, now you know you can write it. So if you
Mhm.
can do it in your reading, you can do it in your writing. If you do it in your writing, you can do it in your reading. So I guess I was thinking that maybe that might be a nice next step for us when we think about this group of kids and trying to show how those two are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about shifts in student learning, and that kind of went right along with what would our next steps be. And then the other one that was on here is what evidence do you have of this learning? And we gave some specific examples. Can you just recap? He was saying something about see or saw or
yeah,
what was
Structure.
that? And that was another thing it would have been nice to have a copy of the text.
Oh.
And I know it wouldn't always be possible, but I could see his lips or his, you know, as you were reading with the other, but just to try to
Oh,
follow
that's
along with what they were trying to read.
That's a good idea.
So it was the fish. So this is where he said the fishing, see it, and they came to me. And that's where I said, did that make sense? So then we were working on the fish part. And then afterwards he said, is seed a word?
Seed, okay.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
So I think he was thinking the fish seed it,
Yeah.
like past tense.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where I said, well, we would say that saw. The fish saw it.
Okay.
But here the author
Yep.
chose see. Because that's, and in his brain that totally makes sense.
Mhm.
Like, the fish saw
See
it, and they came to me. Like, that
Mhm.
is appropriate. But,
Well, and also the seed is probably in his,
Yeah.
that's his structure.
right,
Is that, it would make sense for him to say the fish seeded.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was that part.
Any final thoughts on our discussing the lesson?
I would just like to point out that there were times that I was guilty of not using we and the lesson, so I just, if I created any feelings inside of you, Holly, I apologize,
But
but
did not at all.
I tried really hard to pay attention to that,
Yep.
and so I just want, you know, that to be known that I realize I did that.
I know I used I or you even.
Nope, that's all good. No feelings.
Whatsoever.
Stop.
None.
So then we're on to step 6.
Mhm.
Okay, so just kind of maybe a little reflection on the actual doing the lesson study.
Mm-hmm.
You know, going through it to begin with, and you
And
know,
then
what
we
did
can
we
use
learn
I.
from it?
Me?
All of us?
Okay. I have to say honestly, like, I've never been good at planning it this intently and just really, like I said, thinking about all those different pieces and just having ideas from you on the table, which was our norm in the beginning, that that was so helpful, and to problem solve around it together and come up with those ideas together, I think was great. And I loved having multiple eyes on them because I am just one person. I wish the third would have been here because he is just kind of his own beast, but just having that and that feedback of where to go next and kind of what to do is awesome. So
I really liked the opportunity to have the data. Thank you for sharing additional copies with us of the data, because if you would have just brought your copy or your records, it's hard sometimes to problem solve together and to decide on the direction to go and things to stop and work on. If we don't all have the opportunity to see that. So I really appreciated even just having the data in front of us. I think that helped us in our planning.
I really learned a lot from us, not explicitly anticipating student and teacher responses, but throughout everything we did, I feel like we had that in our mind as we were planning. We were kind of going back and forth and everyone contributed a little bit. And I felt like that gave us a really clear roadmap, and when those things came up, even those incidental things came up, it felt like we had planned for them, just because we were having that conversation throughout. Well, what about this or what about that? And that kind of created our points to notice. But I felt like that felt good.
Well, I really enjoyed the protocol and going through it. I thought I learned a lot. I think my big takeaway is that in the future when I plan with others, I feel like it would benefit me if as we are thinking about what teacher-student interactions might be, like to actually capture more prompts that we could use. To me, I think that would be more supportive for me in the look-fors piece of it. So I don't know, like when we opened up the prompting guide and we talked about some of the things we might say or could say, for me then, when you did say it, was really easy for me to identify that when I was watching our lesson take place. So, so that is probably my big takeaway, is that I don't know, I kind of want to think about that prompting piece a little bit more, and I also like that idea of at least having one text for the team to look at while watching.
I think also, I don't know if this can be added, but like the timeline piece of it, kind of giving an idea of what each of those steps, it might be different each time, and I understand that, but having that time frame to work into, I think, was really good for sure for the planning part, to be able to say, okay, we only have this much time, like, and there was something I saw that said make a decision and stick to it and like go, and I think that that's really crucial too, because we could have, I think, debated about a lot of things the whole afternoon, and still maybe not settled on something. So just to go with it and then revamp if needed and for the lessons. So
yeah,
great.
okay.
Thanks
well,
so
thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Holly.
yes.